Right around Australia, there are groups of people I call trimtabs, working to democratise democracy. Until recently, politics was always something done by other people in places we could not access, operating by rules we did not understand. But now, all that's changing, thanks to trimtabs. Before I explain that, I first need to tell you about a remarkable man who died twice. Richard Buckminster Fuller, or Bucky for short, was once a household name. We love to distill complex ideas down to a single person. If I ask you to name a genius, you'll immediately think Einstein. For a playwright, you might say Shakespeare. For a painter, maybe Picasso. Well, 50 years ago, if I asked you to name an inventor or a futurist, chances are you would have named Buckminster Fuller. You may not have heard of his name, but you've certainly been touched by some of his ideas. Bucky invented the geodesic dome, a construction idea popular in the 60s and 70s. It was once described by a former proponent as smart, but not wise. Super efficient to build, but impossible to find furniture to fit against its curved walls. Bucky invented the Dymaxion map that did away with the distortions of the maps that we are much more familiar with. And he invented this thing, the Dymaxion car. And yes, if you're thinking as I am, it looks a lot like that car that Homer Simpson invented, I think you're right. Bucky's inventions were hit and miss, but it was his thinking that had the biggest impact. Bucky developed theories for how all the needs of humanity could be met for everyone, for all time, without depleting our world's precious resources. He urged us to think of Spaceship Earth. Bucky's ideas laid the important foundations for modern environmentalism. But before his long and very productive career, Bucky was once in a very dark place. His first business was a bust. He was bankrupt. His beloved young daughter had just died. And with no money, no children, and seemingly no future, he found himself standing beside Lake Michigan, intending to swim out as far as he could and to drown himself. But in that moment, on the edge of a lake and in the deepest of despair, something changed deep inside Buckminster Fuller. Having made the decision to end his life, he realised that he was now as good as dead. And that gave him a great freedom. He realised he no longer belonged to himself. In that moment, he belonged to the universe. And he had an epiphany. What if he turned the rest of his time on Earth into a grand experiment to see how much impact one man could have? If he harnessed all the knowledge he had gathered throughout his life, his education, his insights, his ideas, his inventions, and he applied himself in the right place at the right time for the betterment of humanity. This led him to liken himself to another invention, the trimtab. He said the idea hit him very hard, thinking about what one little man could do. When explaining the trimtab, he'd often talk about the largest passenger liner at the time, the Queen Elizabeth. More than 1,000 foot long and weighing almost 100,000 tonnes in the old measurements. It was enormous. When travelling full steam ahead, a massive wall of water rushes past each side of its 19-foot long rudder. Bucky observed, "It should take a huge amount of force to change course, but it doesn't. It's directed by a tiny, simple mechanism called the trimtab." Attached to the edge of a rudder, the trimtab is a strip of metal, a little taller than me, a little wider, and it's not hard to turn. But when you do, it creates a low-pressure region on one side, and that pulls the whole rudder around. Bucky said, "It takes almost no effort at all. And pretty soon, that little trim tab has the whole ship pointing in a very different direction. Bucky saw himself as a human trim tab. The little individual can turn the giant ship of state, and that's me, he said. One person acting in the right place at the right time can make a big difference. Now, looking around the world, that often doesn't seem possible. In the last 12 months, we've seen political chaos in 3 of Australia's closest allies, the UK, Canada, and the United States. We see societies struggle with hyperpolarisation and the erosion of social cohesion. There are ongoing conflicts in Europe, in Asia, and the Middle East. Global progress to address climate change is stalling, and we are losing the battle for a habitable planet. These are massive, daunting forces, and forces that feel like they have their own momentum, forces that seem impossible to shift. But here in Australia, something remarkable is happening. Over the past decade, we've seen the emergence of the community independence movement, a trim tab for our nation. If you've never heard of a community independent, it's really quite simple. Invariably, 2 or 3 people meet up and decide their current representative is not working for the community. They form a group and they embark on a deep listening exercise. They hold kitchen table conversations, town hall meetings, street stalls. The group grows, and soon dozens, and then hundreds of trim tabs decide they want true local representation with nothing between them and their own community representative. Instead of waiting for change, these trim tabs engage in active hope, taking the initiative to shape the future of their community. A candidate is chosen not by a party, not by some faction, but by the very people they are tasked to represent. Often, the best candidates, when approached, will say, "No thanks, I've never wanted to be a politician." And the groups respond, "Great, you've passed the first test." These community candidates enter the political arena, an unfamiliar political arena, knowing they have a local army of volunteers who will be beside them all the way to the election and beyond. A candidate with the backing of the community and without the baggage of a party machine. An independent candidate who, when elected, would deliver for the community and not for vested interests. Small forces, individual citizens, coming together to create big change. The community independence movement started in 2012 when a small group from the country seat of Indi met in the Wangaratta Public Library. They were frustrated that their Member of Parliament, a party member through and through, had taken the community for granted. The party that she represented assumed that the seat was theirs by right. The newly formed group, Voices of Indi, embarked on that deep listening. And through a town hall selection process, they chose Cathy McGowan as their candidate. The community rallied around her, and at the 2013 election, Cathy won by a narrow margin. That victory, which many thought would be impossible, was a trim tab moment. Small, collective actions, when applied at the right time, altered the course of Australian politics. What started out in Indi as a moment has become a national movement. 6 years later, in a very different part of the country, a similar thing happened. In 2019, the good people of the community of Warringah felt that their local member no longer represented them, and they chose an outstanding challenger. Zali Steggall, a barrister, an Olympic gold medalist, toppled a former Prime Minister. And then in 2022, a remarkable thing happened. Tens of thousands of volunteers and donors joined forces to bring about massive change. 7 new community independents were elected to the Australian Parliament. These weren't just campaigns against political parties, they were campaigns for a new form of politics, one where politicians put people before parties, one where the community is at the very heart of our democracy. In the federal election just passed, Australians saw a dramatic shift in the political landscape. For the first time ever, 1 million Australians voted for an independent, and 1/3 of Australians are no longer voting for either major party. We are rejecting the old political system, one that favours division over debate and power over purpose. This past election, the majority of community independent MPs were returned. In 1 in 4 electorates, the community had an independent to vote for. Now, there's no silver medal in politics, but if there were medals, 22 communities around Australia would have come home with a gold or silver medal. We are on track to see the lowest vote for major parties in history and the highest vote for independents. The movement didn't get everything it had hoped for, but it showed that consistent pressure applied over time can cement real change. Now, I started by describing Buckminster Fuller as the man who died twice. He could have made a different choice that day by the lake. But at the edge of oblivion, the old Bucky did die and a new Bucky was born. Freed from the shackles of tradition, empowered with audacity, he dedicated to discovering what impact one person could make over a lifetime. His inventions and thoughts left a legacy, sure, but perhaps his greatest influence came from that very simple idea that trimtabs can change the world. When he finally did pass away, when he died for that second time, his family chose this headstone. We can learn from Bucky. We can all be trimtabs if a handful of the brave and the audacious step up and apply the right pressure in the right place at the right time. Together, we can change the status quo. Together, human trimtabs can help their communities to reclaim the democratic process. Together, we can redemocratise democracy. Thank you. Thank you.